My question relates to the extent of student accommodation in parts of Dublin Central, the concerns of the communities there on the social implications of so much student accommodation in certain areas.
Thank you, Deputy Minister.
Thanks, Chair. Again, thanks, Deputy Sullivan, for raising this issue, because student accommodation is an area we're trying to concentrate on as well. We are aware of the fact that on occasions, development proposals for student accommodation developments can raise concerns at community level, and that's what you're bringing here today. However, the planning system is extremely open and transparent as regards community participation in the decision-making process, including the avenue of third-party appeals from Bord Pleanála. While recognising local concerns that may arise, I am sure that the Deputy would nonetheless agree that the provision of housing for students is an important and distinct category of accommodation within the overall rental sector in Ireland that has been under-provided for in recent years. This level of under-provision has displaced demand into the wider private rental sector and added to the upward pressure on rents. Therefore, the provision of additional student accommodation is an essential part of core solution to our current housing issues, and this is recognised in Rebuilding Ireland, which provides for preparation of a national student accommodation strategy, legislative and other initiatives to facilitate the higher education institutes accessing funding with the Housing Finance Agency, a streamlined planning approval mechanism, maximising potential for purpose-built student accommodation and appropriate HEI campuses and public lands. Part 5 of the Planning and Development Act 2000 applies to development projects concerning the provision of dwellings such as houses or apartments. These are different to the type of accommodation complexes often occupied by students over academic terms that have shared facilities and are subject to central management arrangements and do not constitute separate dwellings. However, student accommodation complexes can form part of wider mixed residential developments, including conventional houses or apartments, which could be subject to Part 5. So each project needs to be considered on a case-by-case basis, which is what happens with planning authorities. I am aware that Dublin City Council is closely monitoring the development of student accommodation projects so that an appropriate balance and mix of housing and tenure types is realised in specific areas of the city in line with the statutory development plan and the Council's housing strategy. And I understand that the concerns you raise, but I would say to you, many people out there would say to us that there is accommodation that has been utilised by students, which is needed for other families, and would agree with the concept of trying to have a lot more student accommodation, which I think should bring more solutions to your community. And in fact, I think we can probably better provide services for students and help them integrate better in communities if they're built in purpose-built student accommodation.
Okay. Yeah, Dublin City Council will talk about balanced development, but can I just give you some figures? It is reckoned that at the moment, between what's been granted already and what's coming on stream, there will be student accommodation for 8,000 students in a very particular part of the North Inner City. DIT Grange Gorman campus tell us that they will need accommodation for 4,000 students, 2,000 of which they're providing on campus. This figure for the Greater Dublin area is the need for 15,000 places for student accommodation, and yet more than half of these are going to be put into a very particular area of the North Inner City. And at community meetings there are concerns from the community about the implications, the social implications. Now, students are entitled to their parties, etc., but when they're coming in such numbers into areas where you have families, where you have senior citizen complexes as well, it's going to create difficulties. They're also in areas where there is significant drug dealing going on. So is there any awareness of the increased pressure on the addiction services in those areas already, because the inevitable will happen?
Thank you very much, Deputy.
Just to be clear, Deputy, I think it's unfair to just assume that because you have student accommodation you're going to have all these difficulties. I think that's a little bit unfair, and I think that's actually a wrong view to have, in my view. And it does not borne out by facts. And if you have the facts, I'm certainly willing to look at it with you, because we're trying to provide student accommodation, purpose-built student accommodation, with all the services that are needed for everyone's sake, for everyone to integrate. And I think that's something that I have no problem discussing with you, but I think it would be wrong and unfair to say here, just to make that assumption that's going to cause all these difficulties. So just in relation to what's under construction at the moment, there's 1327 bed spaces under construction. There's planning permission granted for 4,741. There's planning permission applied for 2,602 bed spaces, and there's pre-planning potential projects for another 7,000 projects. So in play is about 18,000 over the next number of years in total, but they're not all located in just one spot. And I'm very familiar with the Grange Gorman site. I've been out there, been on it, and again that would be a phased development. And it should have happened before now, and if we can sort out how to finance it, will happen. But it's not going to be meaning that all these 8,000 or even the additional 8,000 on top of that will be in your area. I think it's wrong to assume that. I really don't agree with your assumption at the start either.
Thank you very much. One final supplementary, Deputy.
Two things is, areas where there is high density of student accommodation, that's the reality of what happens in those areas. Secondly, we have the list of planning applications, they add up to 8,000. Now I have to ask also, who is the accommodation for? Because we we know a student population will be using student accommodation for possibly 6 months of the year. So who is going to avail of this space afterwards? And it's going to be profit for the developer who's in this particular area. I take your point about it's going to be moving people out of private rented, so that's going to become available. But I'm struck by the quickness and the urgency with which student accommodation has been going up, and we're not seeing the same urgency and quickness with the other type of housing that is needed. Student population are transient. They're coming into areas where there already is a transient population with private rented, with hostel type accommodation, and it's not fair to the families who are living there already, the communities who are already there. I don't object to students partying, but that is the reality. That's what they do.
Thank you very much. One final reply.
Again, Deputy, the student accommodation is something that it hasn't just sprung up and over. It hasn't been an overnight success. I wish it was. But these projects have been sitting idle for many years and waiting for funding to be attached to them. We are purposely trying to drive up the student accommodation in cities and areas close to universities and on campus in a lot of cases as well. And we're actually trying to encourage and provide funding for the education institutes themselves to drive this on-campus accommodation. So the majority actually are coming forward will be publicly funded through the education bodies. And that's what we want to encourage. We manage to a high standard. And myself and Minister Coveney have visited some of the new accommodation, both out in UCD and in Maynooth. It's a very high standard. And there's a lot of services on house there, a lot of conditions attached to that. A lot of those student bodies are designed, the student accommodation is designed in a certain way to minimise disruption that you might claim happens regularly. It's designed in a certain way to minimise that as well, so it's purpose built. Again, the benefits of having purpose built. I've been in student accommodation all over your area for many different reasons over many years.
Thank you, Minister.
Trust me, it's much better developed in a coordinated way and designed for students in the first place, and it fits in a lot better as well. But I mean, again, sorry, Chair, it's an important issue as well.
Time is important as well, Minister. I'm going to move on to the next question.